We continue now at the top of Daf Kuf Chav Zayin Amud Beis in Meseches Bava Basra. This is Bava Basra Daf 127b. And the previous summit Shmuel was asked, what happens if you have a situation where there's one son and there's a chazaka, there's a presumption that that son is the Bechor, but then the father comes along and says about another child, actually this son is really the Bechor. What should you do in that situation? And so Shmuel now says that what they should do is they should write a harsha, they should write an authorization, zeh lo zeh, one to the other. And the Rashbam says zeh lo zeh hamuchzak, meaning the one who there's a presumption that he's the Bechor. V'yoso shamar aviv olav shu Bechor, and the other child who the father says is the Bechor. So those two sons, they should write a harsha, an authorization, so that at least together they can collect the rights to the firstborn against other brothers. The reason is going to be explained as we go on. And the Gemara now continues and asks a question. Manavshach, the Gemara says, either way you look at it. If Shmuel holds like the Rabbanan, so lishlach lehu k'Rabbanan, so then he should send the answer like the Rabbanan. We're going to see the Rabbanan in a moment. And Rabbi Yehuda Svirale, if he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, we'll also see in a moment. So lishlach lehu k'Rabbi Yehuda, so then he should send an answer like Rabbi Yehuda. What is this idea of writing a harsha, writing an authorization, one to the other? And the Gemara answers, Mesaf Galei, actually Shmuel has a doubt, he wasn't sure. Ikar Rabbi Yehuda, Ikar Rabbanan, whether we follow Rabbi Yehuda or the Rabbanan, and therefore the best solution was to write a harsha, one to the other. And the Gemara continues, Maihi, where do we find this machlokas between the Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda? The Tanya, as we learned in a Brisa, Yakir, the Pasuk says Yakir. The Rashbam says Yakir is Kroy Yiserahu, that's an extra word in the Pasuk. And we learn from that Pasuk, Yakirenu liacherim. We learn from that Pasuk, this is the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda, that the father is allowed to identify to other individuals who the Bechor is. He's allowed to make that determination and make that declaration regarding who is his Bechor. Mikanam Rabbi Yehuda, it's from here, from this Pasuk that Rabbi Yehuda says, Nemon Adam Lomar, a person is believed to say, Zeh b'ni Bechor, this is my son and he's my firstborn. Uchashem shenemon Adam Lomar Zeh b'ni Bechor, and just like a person is believed to say, this is my son, he's my firstborn, Kach nemon Adam Lomar, so too a person is believed to say, Zeh ben Grusha v'Zeh ben Chalutza, he can say, this child of mine, he should not be considered like a Kohen because he's actually the son of a divorcee or the son of a Chalutza, and therefore he's really considered to be a Cholol, which again is an individual who is not considered to be a Kohen, even though he was born to a Kohen. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. A person is believed to say, this son of mine is a Bechor, or this child of mine is a Ben Grusha Ben Chalutza. The Chachamim Omrim Eino Nemon, and the Chachamim say, the person is not believed to say that, and so you have a Machlokas Tanaim whether he's believed or not, and so that's why the Gemara was asking on Shmuel, who does he hold like? If he holds like Rabbi Yehuda, so then the son that the father identified as the Bechor, we should believe that that's the Bechor, and if he holds like the Chachamim, then we should believe that it's the other child, the one with the Chazaka, that he's the Bechor that's presumed to be the Bechor, because we don't just believe the father. So it should really be a Machlokas Tanaim, and that's why the Gemara said, actually Shmuel was in doubt, he wasn't sure whether the halacha was like Rabbi Yehuda or the Rabbanan. And the Gemara continues, Amarle Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak l'Rava, Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak said to Rava, B'shlom Rabbi Yehuda, I understand Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, Hainu d'chsev Yakir, that's what we do with the extra word in the Pasuk, Yakir, we use it to say that the father is believed to identify the Bechor. El Rabbanan Yakir lamali, but according to the Rabbanan, what do they do with the word Yakir? And the Gemara answers to that, but Sarach Hakeir, the Rabbanan would say, in a situation where we have no idea, let's say there's no chazakas whatsoever, there is no presumption who is the Bechor, and they're coming to us new and asking who is the Bechor, so then the father is able to identify the Bechor. That's what the Rabbanan do with the Pasuk of Yakir. But the Gemara says, Lamai Hilchasa, but for what practical halacha would the father be identifying who the Bechor is? Lameis v'lo pishnaim, are we talking about the father identifying the Bechor so that the Bechor gets a double portion? But lo yehei ela acher, let it just be somebody else, let it be not a Bechor. Ilu boy lameis v'le v'matana milo yoivle, even if it was not a child. If you want to give something as a gift, you can give as a gift, meaning, why does the father even need to have Nemonis to say it's the Bechor? Even if he had no Nemonis, he was not believed to say this was a Bechor, he should be able to give as a gift a double portion to whoever he wants to. So that can't be the reason why he's identifying the Bechor. But the Gemara says, Lo, no, tzricha, it's necessary, b'nechasim shenaflu lo liachar mikan, because he wants to identify the Bechor for property that he doesn't have right now. Let's say later on, he gets other property, he wants to make sure the Bechor gets a double portion of that later property. He can't give it right now, because ein adam makna davar shelo bali olam, a person can't give away something that doesn't yet exist. And that's why it's important that he be able to identify who the Bechor is. But the Gemara continues, Reb Meir, but what about according to Reb Meir, Damar Adam Makna Davar Shelo Bali Olam? He says a person could give something that doesn't yet exist. So again, if he wants to give a double portion, even for what's going to come in the future, he should be able to do that. Yakir Lamali, according to Rabbi Meir, what is the Yakir for? And the Gemara answers, B'nechasim shenaflu lo kishu goses. The Yakir teaches us, let's say there's property that comes to him later on when he's a goses, which essentially means when he is on his deathbed, he's going to die, At that point in time, he would not be able to give the property because the goses is not able to give the property, and so he can't give the property now either, because even Rabbi Meir, who says, Adam makna davar shelo bo leolam, a person's allowed to give something that doesn't yet exist, that's only if when it comes into existence, at that time he's able to give it. So that kind of property, it's important to identify who the Bechor is, so the Bechor gets a double portion of that property. And the Rashbam explains, B'nechasim shenaflu lo kishu goses, again, this is property that might fall in the future to the father. It might become the father's property when he's a goses, which again is somebody essentially on his deathbed. The Tanan b'Meseches Machos, like we learned in the Mishnah Meseches Machos, hagoses harei kechai l'chol devar. This person on his deathbed, he's still considered a living person for all halachas. Ubar Yerusha, he's still somebody who there is able to inherit. Ulahanu nechasim itzrich yakin. So let that property that he gets when he's a goses, you need the word yakir to teach us sheyitol ben ha-bechor pishnayim, that the bechor should get a double portion of that property. Devahanu lek amigo, because on that you don't have amigo because he's not able to give the property as a gift. Because even according to Rabbi Meir, that a person can be makna something that doesn't yet exist. That's only if in the future the property falls to him at a time when at that point in time he could give it to others. But a goses, he's not able to speak. He doesn't have the strength to be able to give matanas, to give gifts. Therefore, he certainly can't give it away before it comes into his possession. Because even when it comes into his possession, as a goses, and he can't give it to anybody. Certainly before that he cannot do that. And the Rashbam notes, now let's say property comes to him after he dies, so lo matzi l'shnuya, we can't give that as an answer. De'ein bechor notel b'roi, because the bechor doesn't get a double portion anyhow by things that are roi, by things that are not actually in the possession of the father at the time that he dies. That's why we have to give the answer that we're talking about property that might fall to him when he is a goses. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. Tanu Rabbanan, the rabbis taught, Hayu muchzokin bo shu bechor. Let's say there's a person, and there's a presumption that he's the bechor, he's the firstborn. V'yamar aviv al acher shu bechor. But then his father says about somebody else that somebody else is the bechor. Nemon, so the father is believed in that case. And as we'll see in a moment, that follows Rabbi Yehuda. Hayu muchzokin bo she'eno bechor. Let's say they have a presumption that somebody is not a bechor. V'yamar aviv bechor, who, and the father says he is actually the bechor. Eno nemon, he's not believed, that would follow the Rabbanan, as the Gemara now says, Reisha Rabbi Yehuda, the beginning of the Bryce is Rabbi Yehuda, V'sefer Rabbanan, the end of the Bryce is the Rabbanan. Again, Rabbi Yehuda holds in general, the father is believed to say that a particular son is the Bechor, and according to the Rabbanan, the father is not believed. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Yochanan says, Amar Beniyu, if the father says, this is my son, V'chazar v'Amar Avdihu, but then he goes ahead and he retracts, and he says, actually, that's my slave, Eino Nemon, he's not believed to say it's a slave, we believe that that person is the son. Avdihu, but let's say at first he says, that's my Eved, that's my slave, V'chazar v'Amar Benihu, but then he goes ahead and he says, it's my son, Nemon, there he is believed to say that it's his son, the Mishamish li ka'avda ka'amar, because when he first said Eved, he just meant that this son of mine, he serves me as if he is a slave, but really this person is his son, and so really in both cases Rabbi Yochanan is saying that we believe that the individual is actually his son. And the Gemara continues, V'chilufei abeis hameches. Now it's exactly the opposite. If they're passing by customs, they're passing by the area where taxes are collected, because the law is that the taxes were collected on slaves, and so therefore he actually has an incentive there to lie and say that it's his son. Haya over al beis hameches. Let's say he's passing by the customs. V'yamar benihu, he says this is my son. V'chazar v'amar avdihu, and then he says no, it's actually my slave. Nemon, he's believed. He was just saying it's his son to avoid the tax. Amar avdihu, if he said that it's my slave, so then he had to pay the tax. V'chazar v'amar benihu, and then he goes in and says it's my son. Eino nemon, he's not believed to say it's his son because he wouldn't lie in order to pay the tax. He must have been telling the truth. It must have actually been his slave. And the Gemara continues, Meisvei, we have a question from the following Brisa on Rabbi Yochanan. Hayamishamsho keben, let's say the person is serving him like a son. Uva v'yamar b'niyu, and then he comes and he says, this is my son. V'chazar v'yamar avdiyu, and then he goes and says, it's my slave. Eino nemon, he's not believed that it's a slave. We believe it's his son. Hayamishamsho kevet, however, let's say the son or this individual is serving him like a slave. Uva v'yamar avdiyu, and he comes and he says, this is my slave. V'chazar v'yamar b'niyu, and then he goes ahead and he says, it's my son. Eino nemon, he is not believed, and that end of the brisa goes against Rabbi Yochanan, because here at the end of the brisa it's saying that if he first says it's my slave and then he says it's my son, he's not believed that it's his son. We do believe in fact that it's his slave, and we don't say that he was just saying that he's his slave because he serves him like a slave. And the Gemara answers, Amar Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak says, Hasam over there in the Brisa, the reason why we believe that this is an Eved and not the son, to Ka'aru le Avda Meitzar Meya, because he didn't simply refer to him as a slave, he referred to him as a slave, the border of 100. That means to say that he really is a slave, as we'll see in a moment, and there, to come later and say that it's a son, he will not be believed. As the Gemara now clarifies, my Meitzar Meya, what does it mean to say his border is 100? It means Meitzar Avda Kuf Zuze. What it means to say is that the value of this slave is 100 zuz, meaning he first says, in the Brisa's case, he first says this Eved is worth 100 zuz, and then he goes and says it's actually my son. Now, a person would never call his son a slave worth 100 zuz, so therefore that indicates he certainly is actually a slave. And the Gemara continues, Shalach le Rabbi Abba Rav Yosef bar Chama. Rabbi Abba sent Rav Yosef bar Chama the following, Ha'omer lechavero, avdi ganavti. If a person says to his friend, you stole my slave, V'hu omer lo ganavti, he says, I didn't steal. So then he says, Mativ v'etzlecha, so he says, okay, so what's he doing by you? So he says back, Atam acharto li, you sold him to me, and we will continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Kuf Chaf Ches Amud Aleph.